r/ProRevenge. Use my family for cheap labor and kick them to the curb? That's going to cost you. So, this story happened quite some time ago. I've never tried to seek out revenge before, but the way these people treated me and my family was utterly repulsive. And so, here we have my first ever and hopefully last revenge story. First, the setup. My family lived in a house that was owned by, according to one of my family members, let's call her Mary, benevolent landlords. After they had lived there for 2 years on a lease, the lease expired, and so they started living there on a month-to-month basis. Mary's husband, let's call him John, suggested that they renew their lease, but Mary, being convinced that they had established a relationship of trust with the landlords, insisted that there was no need to do so. This was the first mistake. Sometime after, there was a storm that knocked over a relatively flimsy and frankly hideous chain-link fence that was built around the house. Now, because Mary and John kept important things in their yard, they needed a fence. The landlords were looking around for contractors to rebuild the fence, but John had an idea that he felt would be beneficial for all. You see, John and Mary really loved this house and they were hoping to someday buy it off of the landlords, something that the landlords had suggested as a possibility from time to time. John suggested that he build the fence instead. He would only charge for the materials required and he would provide the labor at no cost under one important condition. The landlords must promise that they had no intention of selling the house. One landlord, we'll call him Benny, not only promised John that the house wouldn't be sold anytime soon, but even went as far as saying that they would only ever consider selling the house to John and Mary. And so a deal was made. John would rebuild the fence more beautifully than it had ever been, and Johnny and the other landlord would ensure that John and Mary would get to keep living in that house, enjoying the fruits of their labor until the day the landlords finally decided to sell the house to them. John and Benny agreed upon what the dimensions and material of the fence would be. They decided on wood, and they decided on the fence being fairly tall. John bought the materials, and Benny paid John for the expenses. So halfway through building the fence, John asked Benny whether he wanted certain changes in the backyard that would, alongside the fence, only serve to make the land value skyrocket. Benny said he would love said changes. The next part is important. John looked Benny in the eye and said in no unclear terms, "If you have any intention of selling this house to someone other than us, tell me now and I'll stop this entire project. I'm only interested in building this under the condition that I will get to enjoy it." Benny responded equally clearly, "You and your family will get to enjoy this home indefinitely. Feel at ease and do whatever you want with this yard." And so the fence was finished and it was beautiful. Now this is the part where I come in. I came to visit my family and I helped them finish the fence and clean up the yard. I wasn't particularly happy about the terms of this agreement, but there was nothing that could be done now. And now comes the part where my family gets screwed hard. Not so much as a week after the fence had been built, Mary gets a call from the other landlord. Let's call her Jane. Jane tells Mary that something unexpected has occurred. You see, her niece is currently on the market for a house and she really wanted to see this particular house. Mary, who can feel herself getting riled, asks Jenny how this could be. The fence was only just finished and they're considering selling the house? Jane assures Mary that her niece will most likely not want the house, but that she has to let her see it. All right, very well. Now, I'm not sure about the details that happened shortly after, but it seems that Jane's niece didn't like the given price of the house, which was now more valuable than it was before, and so she chose not to buy. Bullet dodged, right? Well, if only. Benny came to visit John and Mary with something they had always wanted. Suddenly, the landlords wanted to sell and an offer was made to my family. Now, my family's not wealthy and they would have preferred to have been told well in advance of the intention to sell.
What was the worst time you walked in?
Rufus Rugs, open up! Sorry for barging in like that, but I just had to share the sponsor of today's video. Me and the boys from Rufus Rugs. Now you might be saying to yourself,
excuse me, what the actual are you doing in my house?
But I can assure you're gonna like this. We've been hard at work creating the best quality and premium hand-tufted rugs money can buy. Now imagine this. You, chilling on your bed, watching a Rufus Stories video, and staring at a rug that's not just a rug. Nope, it's a masterpiece. It's the kind of rug that makes your friends wish they were you. But they're not. And the best part is that these aren't your average cheap quality rugs. Nope, each one is handcrafted by me and the boys. No shortcuts, no robot assembly lines, and no dropshipping BS. Just pure rug grind. Whether you love anime, sports, cars, or anything else you can think of, we can turn it into a rug. So click the first link in the description and have your custom idea come to life.
Nonetheless, the offer that was presented was not unfair, and my family said yes, so excellent. Yet, as soon as my family was approved to purchase the house, Benny came back with a change. The landlords no longer wanted to sell the house at the original price. Instead, the price they had in mind had now skyrocketed to roughly the same price as the most expensive house in the area, a price John and Mary could no longer afford, and certainly more than the house was actually worth. That's not the worst of it, though. Suddenly, the landlords needed to sell the house immediately. John said to Benny, "We had a deal." Benny responded that they suddenly needed the money because of some family members' needs. Later on, the story changed to them no longer needing the money. Then it was Jane who needed the money because of some other piece of a completely fabricated story. The point was that they wanted to sell the house now to line their pockets, but they could never stick to a single excuse. Again, John told Benny that they had a deal. Benny's response, "I don't remember that. We never got anything in writing, and so we never had any deal." Jane later told me a verbal agreement doesn't mean anything. Unfortunately, in the eyes of the law, nothing could be proven. We couldn't force them to sell the house to my family at the original price, and we couldn't force them to let my family keep living there. All right, thought my family, we just want to get paid for the labor that we put into the fence then. This was not ideal since they now needed to leave the home they had lived in for quite some time. But they knew it wasn't theirs and they weren't going to put up a fight over it. At this point, they just wanted to get paid for their labor. Benny and Jane, of course, didn't want to pay. My family members needed that money. Given that they were getting kicked out on such short notice, the money was needed in order to find a new place to live. Benny and Jane, however, insisted that they had always been fair with the rent and they simply didn't owe my family legally. I told Benny and Jane that they would just take things to court and have a judge decide. Given the fear of court, Benny and Jane decided that they would pay my family, but that the labor for this gargantuan monstrosity of a beautiful fence just wasn't worth that much more than the materials it was made of. The labor couldn't possibly be that much, they reasoned. Also, they would only pay for the labor for the fence, not for the rest of the work that was done on the yard. Well, so everyone decided to get an estimate. The average we got was $3,000 for the labor. Benny and Jane managed to get one estimate from one of their family members at $350. What a joke. The day to leave arrived and Benny and Jane paid my family far less than what the labor was actually worth, and my family left. We lost. We lost so much. The effort that went into building this fence with the intention of getting to enjoy having it under the agreement that they would get to keep living there, just to have it taken away and to barely even get paid for the labor, that was unacceptable to me. We couldn't win anymore, but I didn't want them to win either. So, the revenge. I read up on fences. I learned far too much about what was and what wasn't allowed when it came to fences. I memorized every rule. I learned when permits were and were not needed. I learned what the allowed dimensions were. I learned about whether fences needed finish. Oh boy, the things I learned about fences. I learned that you don't need a permit if your fence gets damaged so long as you're rebuilding the exact same fence. But this was wood and the old one was chain link. I learned that the fence needed to be painted, but this one was not. I learned that the fence had a very specific height limit, one which this fence violated. These people were so happy to stick to the letter of the law when it came to screwing over my family, so I decided that I too would stick to the letter of the law. Somehow the county found out that this fence was permitless, unpainted, and far too tall. Shortly after the county found out, Benny and Jane got a visit from the county right before they managed to sell the house at their obscene price. What do you know it? Their fence was built illegally. Now sometimes you can just get a permit after the fact, but their fence wasn't allowed to be built the way that it was. There were no plans, no inspection, or anything else that the county required. It had to come down. My family got a very angry call. The landlords accused my family of never getting a permit, something that my family literally could not do given that this was not their property. Besides, it was the landlords who assumed no permit was needed and my family knew nothing about how permits worked. So the fence had to be torn down. And there goes the money they saved by not paying my family, and they lost their prospective buyer too. There goes the money they wanted to make, and the land value of the house went down. There goes the price point they wanted to sell the house at. And they need to build a new fence since no one will want to live in this house without some sort of fencing. Looks like they'll need to pay for a new fence, labor and all, from an actual contractor. We didn't win, but neither did they, so screw you. Story 2. r/ProRevenge, I unleashed the monster bureaucracy upon my neighbor and watched it destroy him. So this is a story of how patience is key and how letting someone else get revenge for you is by far easier than doing it for yourself. The setup. I live in one of those doubled up houses where they build two houses adjacent to each other with mirrored layouts so we share a wall but are otherwise completely separate. For years, the house next to me belonged to a nice old lady who you never really noticed or had any trouble with. When she died and the house was resold, the troubles began. The target is someone who I will refer to as Jack Sparrow for reasons that will become clear later. Jack owns a sizable construction business and does some real estate on the side. He buys a house and rents it to a bunch of foreign construction workers that work for his business. I say foreign because it is relevant to the story. There are rumors Jack is doing some shady stuff to have them work for him dirt cheap by claiming that they're national workers in their native country and paying them according to that wage, and not the much higher minimum wage of my country. Not exactly on the up and up. Possible unreported labor as well. Anyways, he stuffs 4 to 6 of these in the said house for them to live while they work here. Now, I don't have anything against foreign construction workers, but these guys living next door have 2 traits that are very problematic. They are extremely loud and they do not give a crap about anyone else. We're talking nonstop music and partying starting Thursday evening throughout the entire weekend until they leave at 5 a.m. Monday morning to go to work. Seriously, I don't know how or when they sleep. It's like quite literally nonstop. We're talking I'm wearing headphones but still cannot hear my own sound over their music loud, since it would appear that they've designated the living room adjacent to the shared wall as the party room where the fun happens. At first, I do the neighborly thing and just suck it up, thinking it's just one party, just one weekend. After the 3rd one in a row, I go over to ask them to turn it down since it is a night disturbance. It's technically illegal to blast music this loud, hearable on the street and across the street by my other neighbors who have also complained. I'm met with a half-hearted, "So sorry, we'll fix." Except nothing changes. I go over several more times, each time angrier, each time met with, "But it's not loud. If I can hear your music in my own house, over my own TV and my music, I would say that it is in fact too loud." I contact Jack since he is their landlord and explain the situation, after which I'm met with an abrupt sorry, not my problem. Basically, Jack told me to get screwed. So I involve the police and call them every time things get out of hand. After about a dozen calls, sometimes even twice in the same night, it is clear that even regular police interference doesn't help the situation. I should mention that I am a lawyer, so I know what the next legal steps are. I also know that other than a token paper from a judge saying their music is too loud, I'm not really going to get anything. Things would, like they already sometimes had, become a cat and mouse game where they would blast their music extremely loud to piss me off or to wake me up for a few brief moments, so that by the time I could get proof or police show up, there would be no music. I'm deadlocked with my only further option being pretty useless and a waste of time. At this point, I'm biding my time and just waiting till something changes. The mistake. So one day I'm at home and I notice quite a lot of ruckus next door, more so than usual. Suddenly, I see through my garden window that a wall is being partially torn down. You see, sometime over the years, the neighbors had built a small adjacent side building adjoining the main house. It was right on the border between us, and when the gardens were being reinforced, the wall was used as a divider to save on fencing. Said wall was now in the process of having its top part ripped off by a crane. I was not informed of any of this, which, while not technically needed, would have been the nice thing to do. I go take a walk so I can take a look at what we're doing and see that they've torn down the entire side building. The remaining wall between our gardens is the only part that has been kept intact, and even then, not the top part. Being a lawyer, and specifically a construction/permit lawyer, I know 2 things. Stuff like this is not allowed without a pre-approved permit from the city. There is no way in hell they have said permit, as I would have seen the application for it. I regularly have to check the online, public, accessible by everyone application to see what permits are being applied for my job, and when I do tend to look over to my own area just so I can keep up with what is being planned in my area. And this is it. The moment I've been waiting for. The situation has changed and the time has come for exact revenge. A quick email sent to the municipal authorities lets me do my civic duty of reporting a potential crime, the fact that someone is building or demolishing without a permit. Since this is a simple report, no response happens since I'm not an official victim or anything yet. Since no further construction happened for a few days and everything was removed, I assumed that was that, and they would only tear down the side structure since it was starting to fall apart due to age. Neighbors have moved all their stuff that was in said building onto their lawn and haphazardly covered it with a tarp. The next week, more construction materials are being delivered and construction starts. I sent a new email to city services with new pictures saying that apparently there is more planned and that I hope they undertake the appropriate action. An instant response less than an hour later, they'd called Jack after the first time to inform him that what he was doing required a permit, and he had assured them that he didn't know that. He's in construction, of course he knows, and that he would stop construction and request a permit. They called him again after my email, reprimanded him for not following his earlier promise, and he said again he would shut it down. I happened to be working from home that day and had to stop myself from waving to the construction crew as they left. Later that day, I get an angry phone call from Jack who accuses me of reporting him and that I would be sorry and that he would come after me for damages for his delays. I respectfully inform him that even if I did report him, reports are in my name but not published and anonymized in later files. I wouldn't have done anything wrong because from the looks of it, he didn't have a permit and should have known that before he started working illegally without one. I end the call before I start to sound too happy with things. Jack has at this point no idea what I have initiated with this. He is Jack Sparrow and I have just rung the bell that awakens the Kraken that will destroy him. He just doesn't know it yet. The Kraken. You see, there is a good reason why most people consult an expert and/or a lawyer when they want to apply for a permit. The rules involved are so convoluted and needlessly complex that navigating them as a non-professional is extremely hard and time-consuming, and a single mistake can torpedo your entire case, forcing you to do it all over again. I have killed entire projects and have seen clients' projects killed by pointing out that on page 127, section 35-1-A, something was left blank that should have been answered. I did some digging and found out that the previous owners of the houses had actually consulted each other about the side building and agreed on making the wall part of the divider between their gardens, so much so that they shared the costs of it and the ownership. That wall that he had destroyed part of, it was also my wall, which of course means I'm entitled to damages, but that's not the important part. The important part is that he needs my permission to do anything to that wall. So when he applied for a permit a few weeks later, added bonus, rowdy neighbor stuff is still out in the open, covered by just a tarp since they expected this to be a quick smash and replace job that would take a few weeks at most. I went to the city center and looked at the application, noticed that they were planning to do some stuff to say the wall that I own 50% of. So I filed a complaint following proper procedure about the permit, namely that even if granted, it could never be executed since Jack needed permission from me in regards to the wall, and he didn't have it, nor was I intending to grant it. This should kill his permit since permits cannot be granted if you know in advance they cannot be realized. No sense in granting a permit to build a certain kind of house when you know they're never actually going to build it. Now, Jack was a bit of a smooth talker and as a construction entrepreneur had his connections, and permits are a political decision here just as much as a legal one. So despite a 100% correct legal objection that should have killed his permit, it went through. He actually called me about it to gloat a little. No worries, one can appeal for a permit in my country. The only requirement is that you pay a €100 fee, which I gladly paid. The appeal instance is a subnational instance and does not care one bit about Jack's political ties or the half-hearted crap that the city officials wrote to justify granting the permit in spite of the concerns I raised. They terminate his permit without any hesitation on the aforementioned legal grounds. Jack sees his permit blocked until he fixes the issue, which he can't, because I'm not really inclined to agree with his plans for our wall, you see. At this point, going through 2 lengthy procedures, it has been over 7 months. The neighbors have had an unfinished construction project in their yard the entire time, forced to store their stuff elsewhere. Something that was always supposed to be a temporary thing for a few weeks while we build turned into something that was taking months with no end in sight. But wait, there's more. The above was the administrative part of the matter, him getting the permit. Now, doing construction work without a permit is also a criminal offense. And of course, my report got passed around to the appropriate instances, so now Jack was also the subject of a criminal procedure for a construction offense. Not only did he risk fines and jail time, but he was also a construction business and used his own construction business for the work he did on the property. So his company was also on the hook, and one of the sentences that can be given in these types of crimes is to be prohibited from doing the construction or construction-related activity as a business, either permanently or temporarily. Not only was he personally on the line, but his entire business was also as well. Now, during this debacle, Jack tried to sell the property. They didn't go really too well because of a few reasons. One, the property was inflicted with an illegal situation. The demolished side building was torn down illegally, and until said illegal status was resolved, it would stick to the property. This tends to kill the property value quite a bit, since nobody wants to buy something that they'll have to spend time and money on to make it legal again by either rebuilding the torn down building or getting a regularization permit for it. Made even worse by the fact that he applied for the said permit and had it denied, so he couldn't even claim that said permit would be super easy to get. Secondly, Jack never intended to sell the property in its current state. What he, as I now know, has done in the past is buy cheap old houses like the one next to me. He puts some of his crew in it who can't complain about the subpar accommodation. They trash the place because they don't care, and he lets them. Then when the place is done, he tears it down and sells it to a developer or develops it himself. However, due to his construction crime and the accompanying status for the property, step 2 was not an option. He couldn't renovate it the way it needed to be. Small renovations would not be enough, because covering the crime was always a requirement in any permit he would request for the building, and because of me, he couldn't cover it. Couldn't sell it either because the place was trashed, and any developer looking at it would dip out when they realized there was a construction issue, and a vocal neighbor who would oppose anything big that they would try to do there. Lots of easier properties to develop than that one. In conclusion, anyway, that is where we are today. Jack is staring down the barrel of a criminal court procedure that is about to happen where he is risking his business and livelihood. His existing projects also gather special attention from city services now, since he is now outed to them as someone who cuts corners on permits and regulations. He cannot really sell the property unless he cuts a massive loss, since in its current state, it is absolutely trashed. He can't develop it or sell it to a developer because all development plans involving the adjoining wall, which he cannot use in big ways unless he gets my permission. The rowdy neighbors are stuck living in a smaller house than what they had in a place they trash, but that cannot easily be renovated or fixed in the major way that it needs. They have quieted down a lot, possibly because Jack blames them for his current situation, which isn't wrong, I suppose. I have awakened the Kraken and set it off on Jack Sparrow, and it utterly ruined him. And the best part is that I had to do very little to do it. All I really did was nudge the abomination that is municipal bureaucracy and point it in his direction, and they did the rest. I could tell you that he called me to complain and even beg about letting him use the wall the way he needs it so that he can get on with his business and fix the issues, and use them to show his good faith in court in the criminal procedure, that he was losing money and customers over this and was in danger of losing his entire business, and that I then smugly replied with, "Not my problem." But he didn't, so for now we'll just have to imagine that he did.